of using poles or polarities, things that are different, indeed opposite. Poles can also be complementary in that they may both be necessary and both have some positive qualities. Well, to start today, we're going to talk about two more polarities in the chapter 3 that's entitled The Struggle Between Space and Time. Tillich talks about how time and space are central for human life, indeed for all life, and indeed for every created finite thing. Let me read just a little bit of what he says. Time and space are the main structures of existence to which all existing things, the whole finite realm, are subjected. We can measure time only by space, and space only in time. Motion, the universal character of life, needs time and space. Mind, which seems to be bound to time, needs only embodiment in order to come to existence, and consequently, it needs space. By the way, that's page 30, the first page of this chapter. I do want to make a little side note that I think we can detect a little bit of dualism here in Tillich, mind-body dualism, in that he especially associates mind with time and matter or embodiment with space. But I would say that our mind, our thinking, is always embodied, always is spatialized, as well as involving time, as well as being temporalized. And also, of course, that our bodies move and change through time. Early in this chapter, Tillich focuses in on space. Thus, I've underlined the word space. And he associates a number of isms with space. And overall, these isms are definitely negative. He talks about paganism. That literally means the religion of the country. And Christians use that to refer to the traditional religions of the Roman Empire, the traditional gods and goddesses, because Christianity began more as a religion of the cities, not the countryside. Polytheism, of course, the belief in many gods and goddesses. Tribalism, focusing on your particular tribe or small group. And something more modern, he associates nationalism, a particular ethnic group, a particular country where maybe one major ethnic group kind of dominates the culture and the political life. And he associates all of these things with a particular place, a particular space for a particular people. Tillich goes on to theologize about this, saying that what human beings and human groups tend to do is we tend to identify too much with our own particular special place. And we turn that into an idol. We make an absolute out of that. We make that a god. And the God of our place is the God that's above all the other gods. As Tillich puts it, all of these isms elevate one God above competing gods, even as my space, my particular place, is supposedly elevated above all other particular places and spaces. Now, that indictment of polytheism would be questioned by a lot of scholars today. This idea that polytheism or paganism or tribalism necessarily means that you idolatrize your own space and the God of your own space and your own people. For example, let's think a little bit about a tribal group back in hunting and gathering times, and there still are some tribes today that hunt and gather in places like the Amazon, the bush country of Africa, Papua New Guinea. Do we really think that these people who were tied to particular places that they said, my holy mountain is better than that holy mountain over there, of those people over there. The God of my, or spirit of my holy mountain is better than that spirit of that holy mountain over there. Maybe not. Also, we can definitely say that the Roman Empire, and this would also apply to some other empires, the Roman Empire was not at all really into absolutizing the gods of Rome, Jupiter, and so on. No, they were quite open to people worshiping lots of different gods and goddesses. They were concerned that after the emperor died, or an emperor died, he became a god according to the Roman Empire's politics and theology. And to show you were a good citizen, to show you were loyal to the state, you were supposed to take part in a sacrifice in honor of the divine emperor. Now, Jews had a pass because they had an ancient tradition of only offering sacrifice to their one God, their national God, Yahweh. And the Romans were okay with that because that was their ancient tradition. Christians got into problems, though, because they weren't part anymore, eventually, of the Jewish tradition, nor would they be good citizens according to the Romans and sacrifice in honor of the emperors. But in general, the Roman Empire said the more the merrier. We're glad to have lots of festivals, lots of sacrifices, because you want to cover your bets. You want to bring good fortune to all parts of the empire. You want to avoid bad fortune in all parts. So this idea that polytheism and paganism and all of that, and the lifting up of the Roman Empire necessarily led to a kind of absolutism of my particular god or space, is very questionable nowadays. Okay, well, let's come back to these isms and the problems that Tillich had with all these isms. It isn't really focused on a whole lot, but here is the real issue that Tillich is concerned about. Nationalism of the kind that had taken over in Nazi Germany and other places. Remember, Tillich was forced to leave Germany in the 1930s, just ahead of the Gestapo. There was an arrest warrant out for him. So Tillich was right that Nazism very much associated itself with German blood and German soil. The Aryan race was the master race, the pure race, the super race, and the Germans were the purest of all the Aryans. And similar things were going on with Italian and Spanish fascism. Also, more with the Axis powers, Japan. They had become very imperialistic and saw themselves as a divine people, descended from the divine sun goddess, as a special people. So Tillich had a real concern with certain modern nationalisms, fascist kind of nationalisms that did really end up idolatrizing, demonizing a particular people, a particular nation, a particular ethnic group, a particular land. That's where his real negative concerns about space really come from, I think. Okay, Tillich goes further then in talking about space and how ancient religions tended to focus on space more than on time. And he talks about the tragic nature of space. This section begins on page 33, if you have your book with you as you're viewing me. Basically, Tillich is saying that as far as space is concerned, that there's just, there's change, there's growth, but there's also decay. There's birth, but there's also death. There's this kind of circle or cycle that you can never get out of. And at least for an individual creature, the end is always the same, right? It's death, ultimately. So there's that tragic nature of life in space. Now Tillich says, because of this dominance of space, ancient Greek philosophy and culture believed that there was one three-dimensional space that was perfect. What was that space? Well, here I give you the two-dimensional rendering, a circle. But if we expand a circle to the third dimension, what do we have? A sphere, a round ball. Why was this perfect? Well, let me read a little bit about what Tillich says, page 34. He writes that the circle is the sphere rather, is the ultimate symbol, and he does talk about the sphere or the circle, the most perfect representation of space, top of 34. If you look at classical sculpture, or at the archaic temples in Sicily or Paestum, you must feel immediately that they are enclosed in a sphere. They have no dynamic trend to go beyond it. They are in space, fulfilling it with divine force, bound to their space, expressing the tragic limitation of it. Now there, Tillich, the last part, is expressing the tragic dimensions again of space. But there is also in this Greek cultural idea of the sphere as the perfect space, the idea that as you're bound in that perfect sphere, you have everything you need. You're self-sufficient. The ideal of most ancient Greek philosophy and religion, maybe epitomized with the Stoics and the Epicureans, was to be self-sufficient. God bless the child who has his own, or the child who has her own. Think about a sphere. You don't need anybody else. You don't need arms or legs to reach out, or eyes sticking out, or ears sticking out to see or hear, but you have perfection rolled into yourself, and you need nothing more. That's kind of the ideal of the cowboy of the 1950s and 60s in American culture. A man of few words, keeps in his feelings, doesn't really need anybody else. He's self-sufficient. The self-reliant, self-made American man. In fact, in American history and culture, we have a lot of this kind of tendency. So it isn't just ancient Greek philosophy and culture that maybe had this idea of the sphere that's complete and self-sufficient to itself. So there's that positive side, or at least that hope or belief in the positive side. And as again, now a short side note, Greek philosophy and religion, and then also Christian theology, Jewish theology, Islamic theology, as they were very much influenced by Greek philosophy, ended up thinking of God in this way as God is totally self-sufficient and doesn't need anything, doesn't actually derive or get any benefit from any of us mere finite creatures. God isn't affected by anything. Tillich, again, doesn't get into that, and we'll maybe leave that for another time. But let's explore the final kind of frontier, we might say, of space. As Greek culture and other cultures try to escape from the tragic dimension of space. And what is that way? Well, we've talked about it before. It's mysticism. When you cultivate that sense of an absolute oneness or a perfect unity with the divine, where subject and object, any distinction between an object out there and myself as a subject in here, that just disappears, and there's pure oneness. That's mysticism again. Now, of course, as Tillich puts it, mysticism tries to escape from both space and time, but he goes on to say, still on page 34, mysticism is no real escape from the preponderance of space. It extinguishes time and space, but in so doing, it maintains the basic presupposition that time cannot create something entirely new, that everything in time is subject to the circle of birth and death, and that no new creature can arise. Therefore, salvation is beyond time. So in mysticism, space has its final victory, which is really, for Tillich, a defeat of the most ultimate kind of fulfillment we might be able to realize. A final word, too, on mysticism, now on page 35. As he notes, Buddhism, Hinduism, and not to mention some other Asian or Eastern religions, do tend to have a very strong mystical streak to them. And he writes, the history of religion shows that in the later ancient period, Buddhism and Hinduism, polytheism returned. It was very much a weakened form of polytheism, but the idea was if you kind of get rid of or demote all the gods who are involved in time and limited space, if you kind of demote them and have this absolute oneness, then these various gods and goddesses can come back, even though they're not the ultimate anymore, which is this pure oneness, but they have some purpose. On a kind of secondary level, we can worship these various gods and goddesses of Hinduism, according to Tillich, the various Buddhas or Bodhisattvas, enlightened beings of Buddhism. Okay, now we're ready to get to the second of these polarities, time. This section begins with the title, Time and the Prophetic Message. And he's saying that the prophetic religions of Judaism and Christianity renounce, object to this domination of space. He writes at the bottom of 35 about the prophet. The representative of this separation from blood and soil is the prophet. He does not deny the God of the fathers, but he protests against the abuse of this God by the priests of soil and blood, of tribe and nation. He pronounces the separation of God from his nation. Then he goes on and he references Amos, the prophet Amos, the Hebrew or Old Testament prophet. It is unheard of in all other religions that the God of a nation is able to destroy this nation without being destroyed himself. But God destroys or allows Israel to be punished and destroyed, Judah to be punished, destroyed, put into exile. In all other religions, till it goes on, the God dies with the people who adore him. Now, we might raise a little bit of objection again, as I guess I have here and there, as we unpack Tillich's very deep and rich words and thoughts. But I do think, for the moment, of, for example, Shiva, who for many Hindus is not just one of the gods and goddesses, but actually Shiva is considered to be the one and only God. And all the other gods and goddesses are basically just creations or manifestations of the one God who in his purest form expresses the personality of Shiva. But for these rather monotheistic Hindus, and then some also worship God under the name of Vishnu, and others worship the personal deity as the goddess. Most Hindus, indeed, seem to believe that when the whole universe is destroyed, the one god or goddess remains. So that is somewhat of a counter to Tillich's idea that in in ancient Israel and the other Abrahamic faiths that come out of it, we have the only religion where God may destroy a particular place or space, or even all space, and not be destroyed in the process. A final thought here. Tillich, in contrasting basically the Western monotheisms, and especially he does refer here just to Judaism and Christianity in this chapter, he is contrasting them to all the Asian religions or Eastern religions, as well as indigenous religions, pagan, polytheistic, tribal, primal, ancient religions. All those words might apply. And he's kind of lumping, these ancient polytheistic religions and Asian religions as religions of space that have a tendency to absolutize one place, to be exclusivistic about my place, my space, my God. And contrasting that with the Western monotheisms, on the other hand, where we have prophets and a God who's more a God of time and brings newness, a new creation, a new people in time. And Tillich is here favoring, right, the Judeo-Christian forms of religion, and saying that they are the inclusive ones. Indeed, he goes on to say, in Abraham, and here he's going back to Judaism, but we could also bring in Christianity and Islam as religions that see themselves as all as spiritual descendants of Abraham. In Abraham, all nations shall be blessed. All nations shall adore on Mount Zion. They're the Israelite religion. And then, just a bit later, in Christ, the cosmos, the universe is saved and united. Well, that does sound very broad-minded, inclusivistic, but I would raise a closing question. Is Tillich here being exclusivistic, absolutistic, maybe even somewhat idolatrous in a way, without meaning, maybe a subtle way, by saying that, well, all nations are blessed in Abraham? Well, are they also blessed, perhaps, in Hinduism, in Krishna, maybe? Or can't they be blessed in some of these other religions, through some of these other religions? All people are saved, or all creation is saved in Christ. Well, could all people possibly be saved through the Buddha? Tillich may seem to be, or does seem to be, implying here no. So this may be, even as he tries to be and sounds very inclusivistic and non-absolutistic about his religion, maybe he is ending up being somewhat exclusivistic and absolutistic in spite of himself and his best intentions. I'm done with that segment, with that particular lecture.